Not all. Look, if I didn't say anything, you would interpret it as hip hop is fine with his behaviors. There's no one else being vocal. So you would look at it and just say, because that mind your business, or let me not say nothing about nothing, or those things, it would allow the entire culture to register as if they're for it.
Snoop Dogg didn't just turn his back on Shakur. He played a role in pushing him out of the picture entirely. For years, people treated the Diddy documentary like the final chapter, the last nail in a fallen mogul story. But the pressure didn't stop there. Once the dust settled, attention shifted fast, and suddenly the spotlight landed on someone who'd stayed untouched for decades. From behind bars, Suge Knight started naming names, and the same man who once cashed in on Death Row's legacy now looks desperate to keep the lid on what's coming next. Inside the Las Vegas Detention Center, word is that Keith D, the only person officially charged in Shakur's killing, isn't staying quiet anymore. His conversations reportedly keep circling back to familiar figures, with Snoop's name popping up alongside talk of an alleged million-dollar payoff tied to Diddy. Meanwhile, major documentaries quietly left key footage unseen, and teams close to 50 Cent are rumored to be sitting on unreleased material that nobody wants to address head-on. That sudden silence says everything. A stalled trial, old alliances resurfacing, and whispers about a flash drive packed with names nobody will publicly confirm. It all feels off. This doesn't look like a push for justice anymore. It looks like a countdown.
The man put a lot of out there himself. So whether it's true or it's a lie, he got to answer for that. And whatever his explanation is, we're going to see. But he said.
In an industry built on protection and power plays, the most shielded figure just became the most visible, and that first leak may have only been a test run. And when Sean Combs received his 50-month federal sentence, the industry exhaled like the danger had passed. The case wrapped up, headlines faded, and the machine rolled forward like nothing happened. But behind the scenes, the chatter wasn't about Diddy anymore. It was about the man who always managed to dodge the blast radius. Until now. Snoop Dogg's name wasn't floating on the edges of the talk. It was planted dead center, and that's when everything changed. The timing couldn't have been cleaner. Just as Diddy's legal team started filing appeals, just as his sons rolled out plans for their own documentary, just as everything looked like it was calming down, the first cracks showed up. And it didn't start with Diddy. It started with a prison call from Suge Knight, the man who built Death Row Records, the man who's been locked away for years, the man with nothing left to protect. And what he said didn't just raise eyebrows. It dragged Snoop straight back to the one shadow hip-hop has never escaped, Shakur.
We can all have a grown-up discussion, and I don't think we need to cancel a longtime musical artist related to it. It was controversial at the time when they considered pulling it, and I guess this movie can't be shown in some countries. But honestly, really innocuous content.
The details spilled out fast and raw. Speaking from his cell in a recorded interview that moved through back channels before hitting the wider public, Suge didn't just claim Snoop knew things. He alleged Snoop was involved. He talked about conversations, real ones, with real weight tied to Shakur's tragic end. Not rumors, not vague hints, but discussions that carried consequences. And then came the part that made people freeze. According to Suge, Snoop wasn't just standing on the sidelines, he was part of the silence. The same artist who later benefited from Death Row's legacy, who built his image on West Coast loyalty and calm confidence, was suddenly painted as something much colder. Not reckless, not emotional, but strategic. A survivor who understood how the game works and how staying quiet can be just as powerful as speaking up. And the industry's response said more than words ever could. No loud denials, no outrage tours, no emergency press statements. Because if this were just another rap feud or recycled talk, the reaction would have been instant. Lawyers would have jumped in, statements would have dropped, and social media would have exploded. But none of that happened. And that silence changed everything. Instead, Snoop's team went quiet. No press releases, no public responses, no online back and forth. Just one carefully worded Instagram story posted that same day. Mental health is real. The timing stood out, especially as news spread that young Noble, one of Shakur's closest collaborators, had passed away. Coincidence maybe, but in an industry built on tight image control, that kind of restraint rarely comes from confidence. It usually comes from calculation, and the timing lines up a little too cleanly. While attention stayed fixed on Diddy, another project was already gaining momentum. The first real move wasn't a courtroom moment, it was a documentary. Sean Combs. The Reckoning dropped in early December and surged fast, pulling in more than 21 million views in its first week. even outpacing some of Netflix's biggest releases. But the real question wasn't what aired, it was what didn't. Behind the scenes, footage described as too volatile never made the final cut. Even 50 Cent, someone known for never ducking smoke, reportedly chose to hold certain material back. In an off-camera exchange, Gene Deal, Diddy's former head of security, suggested there were scenes considered too risky to include. When asked who those scenes involved, his answer was brief and telling. People are panicking. At the same time, the second piece quietly fell into place. Keith D, the only person ever charged in Shakur, had his trial delayed until February 2026. 10 extra months to talk, 10 extra months to negotiate, and 10 extra months for anyone who might be named to prepare behind closed doors.
Let's talk about it, man. So you feel like it was bigger than Orlando Shooter Pac. You feel like it's more to the story. You don't think it was that simple?
Because once money enters the conversation, especially a rumored $1 million figure, nothing moves by accident. That's the number Keith D keeps coming back to, $1 million. A figure he has repeatedly described as the price tied to Shakur's tragic death allegedly moved through channels that were never fully traced. And according to Soog, that money didn't stop with Diddy alone. The implication hangs heavy in the air, never said outright, but hard to ignore. If the money didn't end there, then where did it land and who else was paid to stay quiet? Because deals like this are rarely one and done. They're investments, and investments expect returns. So when Sugay talks about Snoop's alleged role, mentioning conversations, understandings, and private details that never show up in official reports, the story shifts into deeper territory. The real issue isn't whether the claims sound wild, it's whether they can be proven. And right now, proof feels like the one thing nobody wants. Diddy's sons are filming their own documentary. 50 Cent is reportedly sitting on unreleased material, and Keith D remains the only person positioned to connect the dots. That tension, those contradictions, are what push this beyond typical industry drama. Then there's Snoop's purchase of Death Row Records in 2022. Publicly, it was framed as a victory lap, a proud reclaiming of West Coast legacy. But the timing raises eyebrows. The deal closed just as early whispers about Diddy's private behavior started circulating, just as federal pressure was building, and just as insiders sensed something bigger on the horizon. And finally, there's the silence around Shakur's anniversaries. While other artists posted tributes, memories, and throwback footage, Snoop's platform stayed quiet. No posts, no mentions, no public reflection. In an industry where silence is rarely accidental, that absence became part of the conversation whether anyone wanted it to or not. It came down to a single repost, an old interview clip where Snoop talked about moving forward. But moving forward from what? That question sat unanswered, and the silence around it only made people look closer. Then there was the response to Suga's accusations, or more accurately, the lack of one. In almost any other situation, claims this serious would bring an immediate reaction. A defamation lawsuit, a public denial, a statement released through lawyers within hours. Instead, Snoop's team stayed quiet. The only noise came from bloggers breaking down the silence and fans debating loyalty and legacy. Industry insiders read that quiet differently. When the biggest names stop talking, it's rarely about innocence. It's about waiting to see how much the ground is going to move before deciding where to stand. And the real signal isn't what's said publicly, it's what starts shifting behind closed doors. Because while things looked calm on the surface, activity picked up elsewhere. Lawyers were brought in, not to sue, but to manage risk. Old associates were contacted, not for reunions, but for consistency checks. And then there's the issue of the flash drives. Kim Porter's name has hovered around the edges of this story for months, tied to rumors that she left behind private recordings and images involving powerful industry figures. The drives themselves have never been confirmed, but what stands out is that no one, not Diddy's camp, not Snoop's, not even the most aggressive tabloids, has directly denied they exist. In a world where denials are easy, silence is the most expensive response of all. Because if this were only about Diddy, the attention would still be locked on his appeal, his prison situation, and his son's documentary plans. But that's no longer where the focus is. The spotlight has shifted to the man who spent 3 decades positioning himself above the chaos. The man who later bought the label Shakur gave everything to. The man who was never directly linked to the violence. Until now, the talk stayed limited to private life rumors and quiet backroom dealings. A shift like this doesn't happen by chance. Someone is steering the narrative. Someone is shaping which details surface and when. And the questions being pushed forward aren't just about the past. They're about who might be next. That's how damage control works. You don't wait for the storm to land. You redirect it. And right now, that storm is drifting towards Snoop.
Well, she just a strong black woman off the tippy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
But here's where things stop lining up. If this were only about Shakur, about old grudges and unresolved history, the targets would look different. The claims would be louder, the reactions would be sharper. Instead, everything feels managed. The leaks are selective, the responses are restrained, and the one person who could shut it all down isn't just staying quiet, he's staying out of reach. No interviews, no spontaneous live streams, no "let me clear this up" moment. Just a single Instagram story about mental health, posted the same day one of Shakur's closest collaborators passed away. A man who had been part of the Outlaws, the group Shakur personally put together in the final months of his life. A group that had been signed to death row. A group whose catalog now falls under the label Snoop owns. And that brings up another front in this story, the documentary Standoff. Diddy's sons are filming their own version of events, a project announced with the tone of a family trying to reclaim its name. But the timing doesn't quite line up. If this were only about defending their father, cameras would have started rolling the moment the verdict came down. Instead, they waited. They watched 50 Cent's documentary drop. They let the industry absorb the first wave of fallout, and only then did they move. That delay suggests this isn't just about response, it's about leverage. Anyone who survived 3 decades in this industry understands the rule. The best time to negotiate is when the other side thinks the fight is already over. And the most revealing part of this story isn't what's being said publicly, it's what's quietly being bought. Because Death Row Records wasn't just a symbolic purchase, it was an acquisition. In a culture where catalogs equal power and legacy functions as currency, ownership matters. The person who controls Shakur's final recordings also controls how that chapter of history is presented. That means if there are details still buried, if there are moments left unexplored, or truths that could still cause damage, the decision of whether they surface doesn't belong to the internet. It belongs to the person holding the rights.
I keep saying that when you get to be the age that we at and you get to become as successful as we are, you have to start doing some things that matter for the future.
And that's when it becomes clear this isn't only about revisiting the past, it's about shaping the future. Power isn't loud, it's containment. And right now, containment is exactly what's happening. The question is no longer about what happened to Shakur or even about what Suga is saying from his prison cell. The focus has shifted to what comes next. The leaks aren't slowing down, the trials aren't disappearing, and the man at the center of the speculation isn't just staying quiet, he appears to be preparing for impact. What remains unclear is who else might get pulled in. A pattern starts to form when you look at who has been removed from the narrative and who has been allowed to reshape it. Shakur's death wasn't just a loss, it was a reset, a moment when blame could be redirected, loose ends could be managed, and survivors could reposition themselves as leaders instead of witnesses. The people who understood that best were the ones closest to the moment. Diddy, with the rise of his bad boy empire and a carefully maintained image that survived scandal after scandal. Suge, the imprisoned architect of death row, still influencing the conversation from behind bars. And then there's Snoop, the one who appeared to walk away untouched, at least on the surface. But resets only work when no one looks too closely. And right now, someone is digging. The question isn't just about what happened in 1996. It's about everything that followed. Because the same figures who helped control the story back then are still trying to manage it today. And the cracks are becoming harder to hide. That trail doesn't start in Las Vegas. It goes back earlier to Quad Studios in November 1994. Shakur was robbed, shot multiple times, and survived. But the damage wasn't just physical. That moment shattered his trust in the people around him, and it set the stage for everything that came after. Shakur pointed fingers, he named names, and less than 2 years later, he was gone. But what never sat right was what happened afterward. The men Shakur accused didn't just survive the fallout, they advanced. Diddy turned Bad Boy into a global brand. Suge kept Death Row alive until his legal problems finally caught up with him. And Snoop did what he has always done. He adjusted. He stepped back from the chaos just enough to stay clear, but never far enough to lose his standing. He recorded with Biggie. He appeared alongside Diddy. He moved comfortably between sides, and when everything settled, he was the only one left with his reputation largely intact. That doesn't happen by chance. That kind of outcome comes from strategy, and strategy like that doesn't grow out of innocence. It grows out of information. For years, the industry framed Shakur's death as the unavoidable result of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry, a tragic but predictable ending to a dangerous era in rap. But that explanation only works if you ignore the contradictions. The supposed rivals didn't stay divided. Diddy and Snoop shared stages, tracks, and business circles, while Shakur's case remained unresolved. And then there's the detail that refuses to go away. The only person ever charged in connection to Shakur's death is now saying the money didn't stop with Diddy. That isn't random. That points to structure. And systems like that don't appear on their own. They're built by people who know how to stay quiet, how to manage narratives, and how to benefit while everyone else is left asking questions. Now the focus turns to the flash drives, the ones that may or may not exist, the ones no one will clearly confirm or deny. According to persistent rumors, they contain private recordings and images capable of reshaping long-held narratives. The name tied to those rumors is Kim Porter, Diddy's former partner, who is said to have left behind material involving some of the most powerful figures in the industry. The drives themselves have never been verified, but the reaction around them has been noticeable. Lawyers have been retained, statements have been drafted, quiet preparations have been made, and the name that keeps surfacing in connection with the potential fallout isn't Diddy's, it's Snoop's. Because for people at that level, the real threat isn't exposure that can be explained away. It's exposure that can't be reframed. The kind that doesn't just damage an image, but permanently alters a legacy. In an industry where legacy functions as currency, that kind of risk carries weight that money can't easily offset. And while much of the attention remains fixed on past events, the real movement is happening right now. Diddy's sons are filming a documentary, not centered on court cases or prison updates, but on their father's life, career, and influence. The timing matters. Filming began after 50 Cent's documentary dropped, after the first wave of accusations landed, after the industry had already started pulling back. That suggests this project isn't only about telling a story, it's about positioning. Moves like that don't happen without leverage, which raises the next set of questions. What information do they have? What was shared behind closed doors? And how much of it are they prepared to use? And then there's the issue that keeps resurfacing no matter where the focus shifts: Death Row Records. Snoop purchased Death Row Records in 2022. Publicly, it was framed as a full-circle moment, a return to where his career began. But Death Row isn't just a catalog, it's an archive. It includes the rights to Shakur's final recordings, contracts, unreleased material, and private sessions that never reached the public. Content that only a handful of people have ever had access to. If there is anything left buried, anything that could still complicate the story for those who were present when Shakur's death occurred, access to that material matters. And Snoop is the one who controls it. That level of control isn't symbolic, it functions as protection. Assets like that don't exist without purpose. Now connect the pattern. Snoop hasn't just been quiet about Suge's accusations, he's been quiet across the board. No interviews, no public clarification, no direct response. Just one carefully chosen Instagram post about mental health, shared on the same day one of Shakur's closest collaborators died, a member of the Outlaws, the group Shakur assembled in the final months of his life. A group signed to Death Row, a catalog that now falls under Snoop's ownership. That alignment isn't random, and the message isn't aimed at the public. It's aimed at the people who understand the history. In an industry where information equals leverage, silence is rarely accidental. It's strategic, which brings the focus back to the documentary battle. Diddy's sons are filming their version of events. 50 Cent has already released his. And somewhere between those two narratives is a third figure who hasn't played his hand yet, Snoop. Because after 30 years in this industry, one lesson becomes clear. The most effective way to control a story isn't to argue against it, it's to reshape it. Right now, Snoop stands alone with the resources, the access, and the leverage to reshape what comes next. The real question isn't whether he can do it, it's what he's willing to give up to make it happen. Because the documentary battle is only beginning. The trials are still ahead. The flash drives, whether confirmed or not, continue to hover over the conversation. And some of the most powerful names in the industry are starting to feel the pressure. But the story isn't really about what's already happened. It's about what happens when control finally slips. Because when that moment comes, it won't stop with one person. It will reach everyone who benefited from silence, hesitation, and distance. And in hip-hop, that list runs deep. So now it's your turn. What do you think is really on those flash drives? Who do you think ends up in the spotlight next? And how far do you believe the industry will go to keep certain truths buried? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see it. We'll be watching this story closely, so stay locked in, and we'll see you in the next one.